Welcome to the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast, where we explore the spirituality of the Christian child through the method of the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. I am your host, Carrie Mecchi-Lozano. So today we have Anna Hurdle and Cathy Johanni on the podcast to continue this exploration of the second plane child with us as we begin this new atrium year and we prepare our hearts, our spaces, our communities to welcome these children into our level 2 and level 3 atrium. So Cathy and Anna really dive into this Montessori concept of what is work. Very different than the secular vision of work as a form of product, as a form of production. And so Montessori's vision of work more is a formation of self. And so how does that apply to our work in the atrium? How do we facilitate that type of work in our atrium? And so Anna and Cathy, who have many, many years of experience working with the second plane child, speak into the work of the second plane child and how we as adults can help create an environment that is conducive to that. I hope you enjoy. Cathy Johanni and Anna Hurdle, welcome to the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Good to be here.
It's great to have you both. I am excited about this topic. We have been on this journey of really exploring who the second plane child is and how to welcome them into the atrium at the beginning of the year. And so now we're going to really dive into their work and what does that look like? How do we encourage it, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this is one of those topics that it seems catechists are always coming to me and asking, okay, how do I get this level 2 child to work? How do I get this level 2 child to not just make paper crosses, et cetera, et cetera? And so I think that kind of diving into really Montessori's vision of work and the Catechesis vision of work and just kind of picking y'all's brain about your years of experience of working with this age child, I'm excited to be able to offer them a different way of looking at it. So I think that we should kind of start with what is Montessori, therefore also Catechesis' vision of work. How is that different than that typical definition of work?
I think that's such a great question, Carrie. We know that the way that Maria Montessori used that term work is different than the way that perhaps we use it in our everyday conversations, right? You know, we tend to think of work as drudgery, a task that I have to do. Montessori has this great quote about adults trying to do less work where children want to do more work because work is actually a human tendency, right? It's something that we're made to do. In fact, I think that she thought instead of being called Homo sapiens, that humans should be called Homo laborans, like that was the nature of who humans are. So really to see work not as toil, but as an integration of the different aspects of the human person. We're a unity of body and soul. So bringing together the head and the heart and the hand in just like manipulation, exploration, creativity, all those human tendencies kind of get summed up in work that really helps us construct ourselves and nurtures that kind of divine spark within us. Did you want to add anything to that, Anna?
I'm just complete agreement in what you're saying. In one of the NAMTA journal articles that Gianna Govi wrote, it's back from spring 1999, volume 24, number 2. The title of the article is The Relation Between the Child's Work and Cosmic Work. And this is a great article because we hear Gianna's voice, which of course just completely is part of the chorus of Montessori's and Cavaletti's. But when she's talking about work, specifically the older child, the child of the second plane, when we're talking about the child's work in the atrium, sometimes we're thinking about the child is working to learn. And she is gently in the article asking us to think about a different way, that the child's work is not so much in order to learn as it is to become. much like what you just said, Cathy, with the self-construction of the person as part of the human tendencies. But this happens through repetition of focused movement and activity, that this drive is unconscious, but it does rely upon the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a drive for the child to continue to construct his or her own instrument. So their hands, their intellect, their spirit. If we're looking more at our work in the atrium, also even looking at our moral compass, that this is part of what is being constructed. And as we know, when we think about the work of the second plane child, even though repetition is still a human tendency, the love of repetition has fallen away. That first plane child had as one of the sensitive period was for repetition. So we still need that repetition. The child still needs that repetition, but we see that we offer a repetition with variety, a repetition that is working toward abstraction.
So, like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like in the level 2 atrium, in the level 3 atrium, we have the books of the Bible. We start out with the very physical little books inside of our cabinet of book. And then it has the repetition of that as we go more abstract with the paper and
Right.
There's different extension works off of that where they're doing the same
Right.
thing just in a different way, and it's not so physical anymore like the physical little
Right.
books.
And I think just a really solid example of that would be with the history of the Kingdom of God work, beginning in the level 2 atrium with an impressionistic story, the ribbon, where we can actually see and feel this. We're given tangible means to think about this great mystery of its history and where it's going. And then we move to the unity strip. And then we move to the mute strip. And then we move to the 3 moments chart. And then we take all of that up in level 3 again with the individual works that go with that. And each time we're going deeper, but yet something has been taken away. So that as far as maybe the graphics and the colors and that sort of thing, that it's becoming a little more information heavy as opposed to just purely those ideas that really fill us with awe and wonder. Now we're starting to get the details. And some people, not seeing or hearing that as adults, we would think, it's just, why do we keep doing the same thing over and over again? But here we are looking at it through the eyes of someone who's learning something, whereas when we're working with the children, we're forming someone in this work. And so formation takes that much repetition, but the repetition with variety.
It's such a beautiful point, Anna. And I think maybe what I find in the children at this age is an incredible confidence. So that they think, oh, yes, I know all that. And they do use that language of knowing
Yes.
or of learning. But I love how you've put it back on the becoming. I have children, they'll come to a presentation and I'll start and they'll say, oh, we already know that.
Right.
By this point, the other children will say, yes, but she's going to take us deeper. So they have this, they've heard that enough that there's more to discover there. And it is kind of, just as you say, a beautiful way to invite them not to just think about knowing, checking a box, as they might in other aspects of their life, but just delighting in a mystery. So what a beautiful way to put it, that they're becoming rather than just learning.
Yeah, and that's a great way to answer that question of Montessori's view of work. It's a becoming, not a doing even, or a product oriented. It is the process, the transformation that's happening physically and internally, rather than what did you finish? Let me see your final product. It's not about that at all.
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about if work in Montessori is self-construction, what in particular, what aspects of the self? What is the work of the second plane child? What are those aspects of construction that they're doing? And I think for the second plane, one of those aspects is this sort of mental independence. That's part of their emerging reasoning mind. So that, that independent thinking and coming to something, discovering it on their own. Also, we know they're honing their imagination at this point and forming themselves morally. So there's a sensitivity to right and wrong, and of course they're growing in their social abilities, their interactions. They're figuring out how to interact with each other. So that's all part of the work that they're doing. And then we're told by Montessori that they're acquiring culture at this stage of their development. And of course, the culture all around them may be very different than the culture we're trying to introduce them to in the atrium. So I think that's a really important one for us as catechists to think about, because we in the atrium have this opportunity to help shape the culture. And you were just talking about that, Anna, instead of a culture that says we're learning something and mastering it and moving on, but this culture of becoming, of continual growth in our understanding and in our relationship with the Lord and in our friendships with each other, this sort of striving, this sort of a work ethic. And really that comes from a delight. So work seen as drudgery would not be a delight. But if you think about the work of a scientist who loses track of time because they're so into their work, or a poet or someone creative, that's more of the sense of work that I think Montessori is pointing us towards, sort of a flow, a continual delight in discovery, a continual curiosity.
So we've been really lifting up how different this second plane child is and how their work looks differently. We have we've talked so much about the first plane child, that level 1 child, and their absorbent mind. But now we're looking at this second plane child with their reasoning mind and their imagination. So how do we as the adults approach that age child specifically in their work? How do we help inspire that within them?
Well, we can still say that the adult is using a Montessori term, the dynamic link between the child and the environment. So the adult is still presenting, proclaiming, sharing the content, the materials, and so forth. But even our method of presentation is different. So before, with our 3 to 6 year olds, we were so precise with our language and so slow with our movements and intentional, because of the child being in that first plane and being in that moment of learning through the senses, of being in the absorbent mind. And we could not give them too much stimuli at one time. So we're presenting in a way that is co-natural with who these children are. But as the children are getting older now, we can use our words. We can speak to each other. We can have conversations, and we can really draw the children in with our words. Again, we don't want to say too much. We don't want to ever give the answers and that sort of thing, but we can pose questions to think about together that can really sometimes help the presentation to be a springboard into even more thought and even more wonder and so forth. So I'm thinking about, Sophia often refers to Paul Ricoeur's 2 moments of learning. That first moment being the enjoyment, receiving the gift, the enjoyment of the gift, and staying in that moment before moving into that second moment, response to the gift. Not jumping to the child's response without giving them ample time to stay in that first moment of enjoyment. Similar to the 2 triangles on our chart that we use when we're talking about the theology of gift and our response to that gift. Often we think at first we need to rush right into a thank you, but as we've been reminded many times, we first must open the gift. And then after opening the gift, an enjoyment, an appreciation of the gift, and then we work with the gift. And so maybe this whole idea of just savoring the content of what we're doing before we jump into asking the child to make a personal response in the form of the child's own work. So looking at this idea of these two moments, that first moment is also the child's work. It's very transformative, it's very formational, and does not require any sort of literacy skills as far as being able to make a written response or to read a passage or so forth. That's what I would add to that.
I think that's a beautiful insight. I was just, as you were talking, thinking about our work with the parable of the 10 bridesmaids and how that is presented both in level 2 and in level 3. And in level 2, how we must take time just to delight in the image of the feast. That,
Yes.
like we have to savor that. That is the good news. But sometimes as adults, we're rushing the child to the preparation part of it, the moral response. But that's really a discipline for us to impose on ourselves, that delighting, because maybe most of us adults weren't raised to savor that first moment there. And I think what I hear in your words, Anna, is really a call to observe the children too, right? And so to see how they are delighting and to offer them space to linger over that, whatever that experience is saying to their heart, or whatever that revelation, that proclamation is saying to their heart, and not sort of rushing them to a product which would maybe make us adults feel better, like, oh, they've absorbed the content, which is really not the point if our goal is becoming rather than that learning, which is what you said in the very beginning.
That sounds wonderful.
It really does. There's a lot to unpack within just that. So, how do you, as a catechist, really encourage the children to challenge themselves in their work?
I think one of the beautiful things about working with the level 2 children is you can have conversations with them about these things. You can present the fact, that we've been given this great gift of time here in the atrium. How can we use that time? How can we use our freedom well? Sometimes I like to talk with the children about the comfort zone versus the growing zone. And I just ask them what they think. How much time in the atrium do you want to be in your comfort zone? Which is great, just enjoying and delighting in your relationship with the Good Shepherd and doing things that you love to do, that make your heart happy and delight in that relationship. And then how much of the time here do you want to be in that growing zone where you're conscious of challenging yourself? Every child would put those fractions or those percentages differently, and that's fine, right? And of course, there's no way to measure that, but just to get them thinking about the sort of different modes of being there, and that it's different for each child. I think that it's delightful that we can actually have those conversations with the children, and help them to think about that themselves.
I love that you are putting value on the comfort zone. I love that, because I think sometimes we, in our adult minds, we think, we need to be working, we need to be challenging, we need to be growing all the time. But that comfort zone is also just as necessary. I've got like this Martha and Mary picture
Right.
in my head right now. Like that comfort zone is important. And there are days and times when we need that.
Yes. Our level 3 atrium was it used to be an apartment, and there's some big cushy chairs in there. And just yesterday, I brought some children into it, and they did their little, orientation, looking around, and we gathered back together, and they said, those big chairs, are we allowed to sit in them? And I was like, yes, you can sit in them. Sometimes people sit and just read the Bible in a big cushy chair, or they just bring a rosary and sit in a big cushy. I mean, like, how beautiful is that, to provide time for children to do that? But this little girl was like, are we allowed to sit in those big cushy chairs? Please do,
It's all for you. It's all for you.
Yes. Yes, yes, yeah,
Okay, so on
yeah.
like a real practical level, what are some of the things that you say to the kids? What are some of the things, how do you approach presentations to different kids in the atrium? How do you help brainstorm with the kids to encourage the work that's in the atrium?
Well, I think that after we give a presentation, that we always end with the invitation to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't changed from the level one. We end our conversation with an invitation to work. And based on the child, we think about what could that work be. So we have the very youngest children coming into level two from level one. They're used to more of a kind of a discrete work of pasting and a tracing packet or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of repeating the work over and over and over again is already there. And then this idea that sometimes there's a handwork outside of the material. They're coming to us with already that idea as well. So in the level two atrium, we still have some of that type of work of copying and tracing and that sort of thing. And we certainly still have some practical life exercises as well. But instead of them, I shouldn't have called them an exercise. We have the practical life materials available to the children. So it's no longer a how to presentation where the process is the focus. Now we're taking that process and applying it to the environment. So
Mm-hmm.
we still have that type of work in the atrium of being able to care for oneself and for the environment and for each other as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we still might have some of those type of activities such as tracing, we're not going to have the pencils shelved with the actual material. So we're going to have a supply shelf. So the child has to think, okay, and get up and move and say, I need a red, I need a blue, whatever, and I need some glue or paste. Even though some of the types of work that we have available to the children might be similar, we've already extended how they work with it. And then perhaps you are that child that is working with that sort of thing, then saying, you know what? Sometimes some of the children in the atrium take their work like this and they put it together and they make a book.
Mm.
I've seen that before, and then they're like, really?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like something I might like to do. So that, as opposed to saying, Cathy, now take your tracings and make a book. So what's the difference there? Suggesting something as, some people have done this, it's a great thing, they enjoy it, rather than this is your assignment.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really what you're talking about, Anna, is really sparking. You used the word springboard before. I think in level one, we needed to learn when to withdraw from the child with the first plane child, but in the second plane, we need to know how to inspire. And
Right.
oftentimes it's just a little thing like that. It's just the way that you phrase it or just a little suggestion. But, you mentioning, I've seen other children do this. I think that they get inspired so much by their friends around them. And so I love to make time and space for that. We gather at the end for prayer. If we have the time, it's really nice to allow children who want to talk about their work choices to do so because it inspires others, and even sometimes to give space for compliments. Someone will say, I want to compliment Ava because she was working so hard on her missal, or I wanted to compliment Ben and Gabe because I love their three-dimensional model that they've been working on for several weeks of Noah's Ark, or something like that. And that sort of sparks within the children, oh, someone else was doing that. I wonder what I could do, but I'll do something different. So they make it their own, but just the community itself becomes a springboard, which is a really beautiful thing to see, I think.
I think we see that quite often, and it's what Montessori referred to as the herd instinct at work. And sometimes we think in our everyday use of the word, we might think of that as a negative, like people going down the wrong path, following the wrong ideas or so forth. But in the atrium, this herd instinct can have a very positive effect on the children's work. So those younger children coming in see the big, expansive work of the older children, that sometimes, it'll be several children working together, and it might take weeks. It's not something that can be completed and put in your folder and move on to something else. But a work that continues to grow. This whole idea of big work in and of itself kind of reminds me again of what you were talking about, Cathy, with the work the comfort work, and then the work that stretches us as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes as adults, we say things that might not nurture that idea of the work that stretches us. The example that comes to mind is actually coming from the secular Montessori classroom in math. But oftentimes, say if a child has been working on multiplication with multi-digit multipliers, and so our inclination might be to give them a problem with like 4-digit multiplication by a 2-digit multiplier. And the child might say, what if you gave me a problem with the numbers running all the way across the page and by a 5-digit multiplier? It's like, gosh, what are we going to do? We don't have enough paper for something like that. And they'll be like, we can tape more paper, and then all of a sudden we have somebody doing really great big work with the same concept.
Yeah. That second plane child loves that big work.
That big work, yes.
The bigger, the better.
Sometimes that's all it takes to inspire something, some big work. You might come in and say, I have this big roll of paper. What can we do with this? Or I have a couple pieces of poster board, or even just ribbons. Amazing what, you get somebody drops off to you, I cleaned out my grandma's closet and there's all this, and you're like,
give it to those catechists.
Yes, but the catechist has no idea how it's going to be used, but the children, it just launches their creativity. So yeah, I love that phenomena. It's just, it's exciting for us as adults because we have no idea what they'll do, but it'll be amazing, right?
Yeah. I love the idea of using the variety of presentations in smaller groups as a way to be a springboard for continual work as well. So, instead of me thinking, okay, today we are going to do the books of the Bible, and I am going to do that either in a large group presentation or I'm going to do it 5 different times to small groups. Like, instead of having this more teacher mentality of this one presentation, I'm going to pick a few different presentations to show to a couple different small groups, and I'm going to do 3 or 4 different presentations, and then shuffling that through over the next couple weeks, but having that variety going on at all times within one atrium session as a springboard for them to want to continue to do different works. I think that's another neat idea to encourage that as well.
I think that's so important because, what Anne was saying in terms of the options for the child's work after a presentation, well, one of them is to work with the materials. But if you say, oh, no, I have to give this to the next group of children, they don't have that opportunity. And so if they're more oriented towards the concrete and less towards the abstract, then you've just robbed them of that opportunity. And as you said, Carrie, you don't want to go to just giving the whole group lesson because then there's less of an opportunity for the child to really ask questions or make comments or share what's going on in their heart and mind. And there's more of an opportunity for the child to disengage.
Right.
And so that's the opposite of what we're looking for. So yeah, giving a couple different presentations and sort of cycling through them over several weeks is great. It also allows a child who might want to hear the lesson again to sit down near your lesson, or you have an open lesson policy. So if someone else wants to join in, even if they're repeating it, that's fabulous. I know I've had in the past one little girl who was in 6th grade, and so she joined the atrium but had never been in atrium before. And I noticed she did all her work sitting very close to wherever the presentation was, because she was absorbing it, sort of, like not the absorbent mind of the first plane, but she was listening and thinking, because she knew that this was going to be interesting and life-giving. So to offer the children that kind of freedom, I think, is really important.
And they're so interested in what each other is doing. So after you've done a few different presentations and you've got kids working at a table all together, you've got one working on pen maps and one working on books of the Bible or whatever, then they're like, what are you doing? Tell me about it. They're interested then. And they're so drawn towards the social and each other and their peers that they inspire and teach each other as well. So when you have that variety going on in the atrium, you're just kind of fostering that a lot more. I love that.
And when we love the material, when we love the content of what we are offering the children, they pick up on that.
Yeah.
And we share that love together. Whereas if there's a presentation that you're not real sure about, or it's not one of your favorites, I would say take that home and work with it until you love it.
That's great advice.
Before you share it with children.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those videos that we sometimes point adults to in our formation courses, the AMI videos,
Yes.
Montessori guide. There's one of them where Monty Kennison says that he knew Mario Montessori, and he walked into Mario's apartment and saw the color tablets on the coffee table. He said, "What are you doing with that?" And Mario Montessori said, "Oh yeah, I take a piece of materials home and I work with it." And, to me, hearing that was mind blowing, that there's always more to discover there. So we as adults, I think, have to cultivate that continual curiosity. I just think Sophia and Gianna had such wisdom in pulling together all these themes. And even after decades in this work, I'll have these aha moments where I'm like, oh, I never realized that these things connect. So for us to have that sense of joy and discovery as well is really, I think, is really healthy, and that is conveyed hopefully to the children in terms of helping them to acquire that culture of work. I know last year we were working with the virtues, and I mentioned to a little girl, I said, I feel like there's a connection between the virtues and the maxims, but I haven't really had time to figure out what that is. And boom, she was like, I'm on it, which is great. I said, well, could you come back and tell me what you discover? And she just worked on it for a couple sessions. And then she, we had little conversations about it along the way, and she ended up making up some questions that were added to the material. They would live then on the shelf in the atrium in case anyone else wanted to read her questions about how they link and things like that. So that can be very empowering for children too, to think that they can discover something that they could share with you or share with the community in a way that's enriching and new.
I like that.
That's lovely. She became a collaborator in the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything we've talked about is just so lovely. Another thing, though, that we have to be aware of that is happening, some of the children that are coming to us in the atrium have been impacted by their educational experience in a way that perhaps they have started to view work as something to be avoided or a drudgery or so forth. So children who have started having to work for an external reward or punishment, a child who's having the very limits of the work defined, like write 5 sentences and draw 3 pictures or whatever, that once we start working for something outside of that internal joy, it starts to change our idea of work. So we really have to be careful with that in the atrium, that we don't in any way reflect that same idea. So another story, this was with I think we were working with the sacraments in level 3, and we had all those those little tiles out with the insets, and we were matching the explanations to the sacraments. And one boy said, "Wow, this is a lot. Are we going to have a test on this?" And then I didn't even answer. The boy he was working with said, "Don't you know these Montessori teachers don't believe in tests?" But, I think we do have to really think about this on a deeper level, that just through our language, using phrases like, you need to get to work, that could come across as something we have to do, as opposed to something we get to do. And sometimes children come in and their work is simply to be. So it is the child that needs to sit on the comfy chair. That particular day, the child who is in a place where he or she's not wanting to necessarily engage in a conversation or to engage even in a personal work and that sort of thing. This idea that we continue from level 1, that we have a prepared environment with freely chosen work, that this is what draws the children into work. And in that same article that I referenced, the NAMTA article, Gianna says that when children have the possibility of a freely chosen work that allows them the opportunity to explore and discover things in detail and the secrets that they hold, then children are drawn to the environment as the bee is drawn to the flower. Then the force of spontaneous work is manifested as a spontaneous response.
That's lovely.
It is lovely.
I think it's important to be able to discern what's going on with each child. And this is, in the first of our 32 points, we talk about observation, right? So I have one atrium session that's from 4 to 6 o'clock at night, an after school session. And I'm just thinking of one of the children who comes and this little guy's held it together all day long. And he just doesn't want to do anything with reading or with writing or even with drawing. And so, when we do a Bible study, he has the Bible in front of him, but he's not reading. He's just listening. He's hearing it. What he's called to in the atrium is more like he loves to plan prayer and lead prayer. So it's not that he's doing nothing, because, in the atrium, our work is prayer and that's what we use the time for. But for him, it can't resemble the academic work that he does in the rest of his life. I've also had children who've come to the atrium, again, not coming up through level 1 and 2, but they are so conditioned, as you were saying before, Anna, from their sort of traditional experiences, that everything has to be teacher-led. And if the teacher's not talking to you, then it's free time. And so that's a challenge too, to help them to see that the atrium runs on different principles. And sometimes we have to sort of scaffold. We can't just drop them into it, but we have to sort of scaffold it so that it's not, the choices that are available are not overwhelming and don't shut the child down. How do we sort of meet them where they are and then bring them into the fullness of this freedom that they're invited to experience and enjoy and to grow in? So I think it's really important for us to do that work when a child, us as adults, to do the work of observing when a child is not really engaged, to sort of think, okay, what could be the reasons behind this? Sometimes some children have a fear of failure. And so maybe they are just sticking with one thing not because that's what they want, but because they can't, you showed me this work before, but I don't remember how to do it. And they're afraid to ask. Or I've had children who are doing artwork and it doesn't come out on paper the way it is in their mind. And they're so frustrated and demoralized by that. So how do we help them then to see that it's about growing? It's not about perfection. It's about walking together. So, there are just so many varieties of issues that could affect the work of the child. And it's really our job to observe with the spirit of the scientist and the spirit of a saint and see how do we meet that child where they are, welcome them, let them know that they are valued here, and then help them to be growing.
That's lovely. When you were saying about the child who might shut down when presented with this idea of work, we also have the children who very quickly pick up on the fact that there is an expectation of work, and that we have then this ensuing busy work, a piece of paper and just kind of, looking busy.
Yes.
And so I say that out of experience.
Absolutely.
So then how do you approach that child, Anna?
Well, I think rather than for me, it's a sign that when we say that before the child is responding to the work, we have to give them something to respond to,
Mm-hmm.
Then so perhaps I'm looking at that child maybe hasn't had that particular hook yet.
Yeah.
That is going to, and I think some of it is just also coming from what they've already been programmed to do in other settings.
So what about the child who's ultra social? So once their work in the atrium, as they see it, is to go around and talk to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we bend that social child that into purposeful work in the atrium, real and purposeful work? When you said that, what comes to me is, if you're in level 3, asking that child to plan communal prayer. But then maybe reminding that child now, before you approach one of your friends to see if they want to do something, how should we be aware of, are we interrupting work? Is it a good time? How can we approach that? Just trying to take those natural proclivities and putting them in a way that would honor who the child is, but at the same time, we don't want the child that becoming something that is causing other children not to have their space. Sometimes when I was a Montessori teacher in a secular setting, sometimes I would say things to the children like, I wonder if you're busy talking all the time, how do you ever hear your own thoughts? But I ask it as, I'm curious about this. That gives a little bit to pause, because it's the child to pause a little bit, as opposed to, just saying, shutting it down. But, when we talked earlier on the earlier podcast too, there is something about establishing norms for our time together. And part of it is that we honor and respect each other's work. And so, sometimes we might have to go back and look at that and remind ourselves of the norms that we have set forth.
Something that you were saying, Anna, made me think, oftentimes, at least the way that I was raised in the educational philosophy that I think was used with me, if there was someone who was a social butterfly and chit-chatting all the time, then there would need to be a punishment doled out for that person or a loss of privileges. And that's very different than what we do. We would look at, well, what is that child trying to tell me? And if they're just naturally more of a social person, what you were talking about, like inviting them to plan prayer, just to channel that. Sometimes those children have great leadership abilities. And I recall a girl last year who was like that. And I said, would you like to plan a little Bible study? And she did an amazing job of just, she worked with the scriptures. She came up with some questions and she led a little Bible study, and that sort of met her need for social interaction. But, I was thinking to myself, growing up, you wouldn't quote unquote reward that behavior by giving her a leadership position. And yet by giving her that opportunity to do some work and share it with the community, it diffused the problem. It was exactly what she needed, and it honored her. So for us as adults, sometimes it's a mind shift, in terms of this zero-sum game, a power struggle between adult and child. No, we're all on the same team.
Right.
So how do we make this the most beautiful for everyone?
I like that because it honors the charisms that each child has. And so those are their God-given charisms. Those are God-given who they are. And so honoring that and helping them to identify how that can serve the greater kingdom of God. Okay, so I think we've kind of answered this listener question as throughout our conversation, but I'm going to ask it anyways in case there's anything extra that you want to add to it. Okay, so we had a listener question that was submitted that says, we are in a parish setting and about half of the children who enter our level 2 atrium are sacrament prep kids and who have not been in an atrium setting before. What are some strategies for incorporating them into the atrium and managing the noise level?
Do you want to tackle that one, Anna?
Well, so I would say that, that we recognize that this is not an ideal situation, but that we take the children where they are. We cannot replace the entire level 1 experience. Plus, the child is not a first plane child anymore. So we don't seek to do that. We do recognize it is, for some children, it's going to be a short period of time that they will be with us, and that we do really have some more specific areas of the work that we want to offer that child, knowing that it is not only is it going to be a short period of time, but we're looking at really specific content as well. I think one thing to be aware of, though, would be looking at the children who are already there. Are there ways in which we could integrate those new children into the space using those children? Like buddying up and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's tough. I think there's probably not a perfect solution to it. The hope would be that some of the children would stay.
Right.
I think scaffolding is a term that comes to mind. When new children come to the atrium, there's usually a week or 2 weeks of sort of building up, transitioning, right, to the full time period, or just to orient themselves before everyone comes back. So that's sort of scaffolding, that's sort of easing the transition, because they may not have had an experience similar to this one, always with the end in mind of the full freedom and the full experience of the atrium, but just kind of considering how we might help them in that bridge time, how we might sort of scaffold the experience, so that they are able to make that transition. And ideally, as Anna was saying, for this to be an invitation into a more permanent experience. I think that's how we want to welcome them.
Right. And I think a lot of the things that y'all were lifting up throughout this whole conversation can be applied here as well. Really observing the child, learning their gifts in order to apply them, different ways to inspire them in their work, to get them to challenge themselves and to think deeply about things, those kind of things. It's a shift. So if you only have a child for 1 year, it's a mind shift. But hopefully you can make them feel so welcome and loved and provide them a space that is not easily found other places, that they want to return, right?
Right.
But I think
right.
that also with a situation like this, we have to go back to like that examination of conscience that Jana challenges us to in her book, of examining ourselves before we enter the atrium to check ourselves for pride and anger, because I think sometimes we look at situations like this with a lot of pride and anger, and that's not going to be an environment that someone wants to return to as well. So yeah, I think it takes a lot of prayer. I think this type of situation is going to take a lot of prayer and a lot of asking for guidance on how to handle the situation. So
Carrie, there's something else I would like to add about work, and if there's not enough time,
go for it.
I was thinking about work from a second plane standpoint of, and again, looking at the child's work in cosmic work, and how we are offering up to them this history of the kingdom of God and the plan of God, and we're seeing this unity and vastness of the plan, but we're also seeing God at work in creation, and creation is working and collaborating together in the work of creation. So, for example, all of the living species of plants and animals have to do some sort of work in order to exist, in order to survive. So, things like protection, reproduction, and so forth. So the first cosmic task is to stay alive, but then there is a deeper unconscious task that is the exchange of services
Mm-hmm.
that help the entire interdependence of all living creatures and the earth as well. So, an example of the plant that is planted in the ground is taking in the rain and the sunshine and the nutrients from the earth in order to survive. But in its very survival, it's keeping the land from eroding, it's releasing oxygen into the atmosphere and so forth. And that the children are seeing this, and it leads to a very gradual, and of course some of our presentations help facilitate that gradual reckoning. I'm thinking maxims in the cosmos in level 3, this idea that we too are part of this plan,
Mm-hmm.
this cosmic plan, and that our work is different in that we choose our work, but how this leads into this idea of my place in the history
Mm-hmm.
of the kingdom of God. What is my place? What is my work? What is my vocation that I'm being called to do? And I think truly when we are like going through the end of the second plane and in level 3, as the child has been given the time and space to work with these ideas and has had this formational experience of becoming, that is what they're starting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
What is my work?
That's so beautiful. It called to mind a child, a little boy who was working with the history of the gifts and pulled out a little piece of beeswax, comb, and we talked about the fact that the candles at Mass are made out of beeswax, and he said, oh, "Wait a minute. Do you mean bees serve the Lord without even knowing the Lord?"
Oh, that's so awesome. Oh.
And and then that means that we get the privilege of knowing that we get to, it's just what you were talking about, Anna, like we serve the Lord and we know that this time in the atrium, or that our choices are serving him. How beautiful is that, that we have a place and we know it. So, yeah.
That's that cosmic vision of work that Montessori gave us. It's so big and deep. We could have adult theological reflections just on that.
Yes.
Amen.
Well, thank you both. I so appreciate both of you talking with us today and just sharing all of your wisdom. I really appreciate you.
Thank
Well,
you,
thank
Carrie.
you. Thank you for facilitating and guiding our discussions.
It's been really wonderful.
It has.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast. So I have many links in our show notes to help you out. I have a link if you would like to submit a listener question, anything that has to do with Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, a question about our work, a question about something that's going on in your atrium and how to handle a situation. I would love to ask one of our guests to answer your question. So check out that link in our show notes. I also am putting a link to Jana Gobi's book, Nurturing the Whole Child, which we referenced a few different times in our conversation with Cathy and Anna. And the Montessori article that Jana wrote that Anna referenced a few times in our conversation is actually in our new book of Jana's. So if you have not gotten your hand on this brand new book that just came out this year, you want to get Nurturing the Whole Child. And there's a link in our show notes on how to buy it from our CGS USA store. There's also links for a whole bunch of different episodes, past podcast episodes that pertain to this topic of the second plane child. We even had Anna Hurdle on a few years back on episode 41, where she just talked about the elementary age child. And there's a few other links from episodes that Anna was on. And there's also an episode that we had Cathy Johanni on as well. And then I'm also putting a link for if you want to learn more just about the 4 planes of development, or maybe you are preparing your heart to welcome the level 1 child into your atrium. We have an episode that we did a year ago that was specifically about welcoming that age child at the beginning of your atrium year, and that was episode 98. So there is a link in our show notes for that one as well. I also have information about how to access our audiobook of The Religious Potential of the Child that was written by Sophia Cavalletti and read by Rebecca Roitsevich that you can access on Audible. So there's information in our show notes about that. Also, check us out on all the social medias. We are on Facebook and Instagram, and we would love to see you there as well. I'm also putting a link to our parent pages. These are resources that you can share with parents of the children in your atria, or if you are a parent with a child in the atria, these parent pages are wonderful, wonderful resources that CGS USA provides to help our work that we do in the atrium spread out into your domestic church as well. This podcast is sponsored by the United States Association of the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. We would like to thank all of our contributing members because you are making this podcast possible. If you would like to know more about the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, or if you would like to become a member, please go to cgsusa.org. Thank you all for listening. We will see you in 2 weeks. Go and fall more deeply in love with God.